Hello, I'm Charles Mallet, and this is a UK column interview. Now, in March 2024, I interviewed Morgan Lerette, and if you've not yet had the privilege of listening to him speak about, among other things, his time as a mercenary with Blackwater, or should I say a PMC with Blackwater in Iraq, and indeed his book, Guns, Girls and Greed, then this might be the time to dip out of this interview, go back, listen to that, and then return. However, if you want to go straight in with it, Morgan, let's get to you. A very, very warm welcome back to UK Column.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate coming on.
No, not at all. Now, just before we started recording, and as an excellent vehicle with which to expose so many of the shenanigans and the sort of skullduggery in the world of private military contractors, you were just explaining to me a situation involving Colombian PMCs. Just tell me what you were explaining then and how that really gets to the nub of what so much of this is all about.
Yeah, so there's a large Colombians have been being used by private military contractors since I was in Iraq in 2004. Blackwater used them all the time, especially for like embassy security. So it's kind of a feeding ground for private military contractors to go down there and get trained soldiers and move them to where they want. So what's happening now is there's a contract, supposedly, this is what the Colombians are being told, that the UAE has a contract. They're going to be going overseas. They're going to be protecting oil fields. When they get overseas, they actually get put into Libya. And then once they get into Libya, they're moving across into Sudan, and they are just absolutely getting chewed up right now. So, I mean, the net of it is that the private military contractor business is expanding exponentially. This is 2003, 2004, all over again, except that it's bigger. And what you're seeing is a lot of these private military contractors are now not taking contracts for their own government, but they're taking contracts for any government. And that's a big step. That's a huge step.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And now, when we spoke last time in that interview, Outsourcing Morality, you said towards the end of it, and I wrote it down because I thought it was particularly apposite, that you wrote of PMCs, they will throw you to the wolves the moment something bad happens. Now, with that particularly in mind, and you've sort of touched on it already, since we last spoke 18 months ago, what are the big changes or the big change as far as PMCs are concerned in the way you see it?
Well, I mean, the two big changes are, one, they're taking contracts for other governments. We renamed mercenaries to private military contractors, and we said, don't worry, you're working for your own government. You're not a mercenary. This changes that entire paradigm because you're not working. The PMCs are not working under the U.S. government or British government or Australian government. They are going over to Haiti, to DRC, to El Salvador. All these countries are actually the ones that are funding these. So it is 100% turning into mercenary work. And I think the most in your face one right now is the one in Gaza, because you have a U.S. private military contractor, and they have a contract under something called the GHF, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is pretty much run and funded by Israel and some other states. And they are working directly for what I would assume is Israel. So you have U.S. passport holders working on behalf of Israel in an active combat zone. And I think that is a huge step that everybody's kind of avoiding right now. To your point earlier, they get tossed to the wolves. There were two private military contractors a few months ago that got injured over there. Did you ever hear about it in the news?
No, we did not.
No, exactly. And that's why you use private military contractors, is because they don't make the news when they get injured. Between their non-disclosure agreements and UG Solutions making sure that the news isn't getting out and really trying to compartmentalize it so they don't know what it's going. Now, look, I will be the first one to tell you the reason why UG Solutions is in Gaza is because the UN is an abject failure at getting humanitarian aid into combat zones. They are terrible at it. They will lose anywhere between 60 and 90% of the food to the warlords that are essentially, in this case, Hamas. So what do? You go and you outsource it. And UG Solutions is doing a much better job. Here's the problem, is that When one of those U.S. passport holders gets captured by Hamas, how does the U.S. react? What are the legal ramifications for that? And the truth is that nobody knows. And at some point, we're going to find out, and it is going to be an absolute melee.
Yeah. Now, just to clarify on a point there, because I think it is a very interesting one. You've written about this. You've written about UG Solutions within the last couple of months and the contract that you refer to, but also, and I'm not expecting that you'll reel them off the top of your head, but you articulated the 6 criteria that constitute a mercenary. And that's a really important distinction to make. But sort of in a nutshell, what is it that does push somebody over the line or an organization over into being a mercenary, and why is that a concern?
I mean, from the easiest definition, are you being paid to go over to a combat zone and fight for a country that's not yours? That is 100%. Now, the UN has defined it, and there's 6 different criteria, and it's, are you in offensive operations? I can't remember what they are off the top of my head by any stretch of the imagination. But at the end of the day, this is mercenary work. We just, when you say that you don't want to say somebody's homeless anymore. You want to say they're unhoused, right? Like you're putting very nice vernacular around something that is literally the oldest profession in the entire world. So if you're going overseas in a combat zone, if you're carrying a weapon, if you're doing offensive operations, this is a point of contention I'll hit on in a second. You are essentially a mercenary. Now, a lot of people say this is defensive. This is defensive operations. But convoy operations in an active combat zone are by definition offensive operations, and they all have weapons. You can't tell me that when you were overseas, Charles, that when you were doing combat operations, you said, "Oh, this is defensive. Oh, this is a defensive operation. If we get hit, we're just gonna run as fast as we can." No, you stop and you fight, and that's how that works. It is absolutely an offensive operation, and I'll tell you, a lot of the Blackwater guys, former Blackwater guys, are very frustrated that I say mercenary, because I don't think anybody wants to look themselves in the face and say, I'm a mercenary, except for me. I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I sleep fine at night. But a lot of these people are saying, well, we're not mercenaries. We were over there with the government. And it's hard to make that argument now that you are working for UG Solutions or Vectis in Haiti or any of these other places where you're not working for the US government.
Yeah, it's a really good point. We'll come back to a little bit more on the specifics of that, I think particularly in relation to the sort of policy area. But just going back to the point you make about the UN, the UN, as you say, may well be able to, or rather we can demonstrate that there's a terrible track record and therefore that anybody else perhaps could be able to do it better. But of course, there's significant collateral attached to that. And some of the things that you pointed to in the article that you wrote was the specific targeting of civilians and the way in which this has sort of played out in terms of the kinetic activities associated with it. We just talk a bit more about that.
Well, the UN actually doesn't do their own stuff either. It's not like they have their own employees. They go in, they hire contractors that deliver food aid. So it's not that different than the UN's paradigm. What is different is that you're doing it with a profit motive. And people think profit is just this horrible thing. I don't think it's bad, because usually you're going to do it a heck of a lot better, as UG Solutions has shown. The problem with the UN, anybody that's seen the movie Black Hawk Down or read the book, where essentially they're delivering food aid and the warlord Adid comes in and steals all the food. Well, that food is then taken, and you're seeing it in Gaza with Hamas. The food is taken, it's put on the local market, and it's exploiting the people that the food is supposed to get to, and Hamas is making money. And once they make that money, what do they do with it? They buy weapons, they buy whatever they absolutely can to continue waging their war. So the UN is actually promulgating that problem by giving over the food aid to the warlords that run it. Now, UG Solutions does a better job. It's not perfect. It's absolutely not perfect. But they are getting food directly to the people on the ground that need the food. Now, what happens after that, who knows? Because nobody's going to take a meal ready to eat and spoon feed somebody, right? They're going to take the food. There's been a number of reports that Hamas waits outside of these things and they're able to steal the food from people that are coming out. So it still happens, but at least you're getting it to the people that need it on the ground. And the UN I hate to say it, but the UN is just not effective pretty much in anything, but around food aid, they are the absolute worst.
Yeah, okay. And of course, this related to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which you already referred to. The issue there seems to be that none of the UN agencies, or indeed any of the others, will actually work with them, which creates enormous problems sort of its own. What's your thought on that?
Well, the UN's being obstinate, right? The UN doesn't want anybody taking over their perceived area, right? It's a territory thing. I do know for a fact that UG Solutions has reached out to the UN and said, hey, if you guys have food, we're happy to help you do it. But the UN is sitting there saying, I don't like your distribution strategy. I don't like the fact that you're only doing this at 4 sites. We would want to do it in different places. UG Solutions is saying that's not like the security around trying to do it that way is so difficult that if you come and you play ball with us, we will get the food distributed. And the UN is saying, no, this is my ball. I'm going to take it and go home. And really the people that suffer are the people that are on the ground. It's the Palestinians. And that's the shame of it, is that we're having a proverbial manhood measuring contest while people are starving, because the UN absolutely fears that they're going to lose funding, and the funding is going to go over to these private organizations. But at this point, it probably should.
Yeah, well, that's a really interesting point, because when we spoke last time, we talked about, I suppose, in some senses, the chronology of, let's say, interference in foreign countries. We were largely talking about the United States, and I suppose to an extent the United Kingdom as well. And you spoke about the way in which PMCs are used first. Now, in your experience, that wasn't actually the case, in that there was a military engagement first in Iraq before PMCs were subsequently engaged in what was described as being a reconstruction effort. But now, the way in which it's worked in Gaza in particular, obviously I'm excluding the IDF from this, but do you see this as a precursor to military engagement involving countries that are not directly involved in the conflict?
I mean, this is already happening. Let's be honest. This is happening in the Ukraine. The Russians brought in the North Koreans. You can call them whatever you want, but at the end of the day, it's a mercenary military that they bring in underneath their military, and they're fighting. So that's one side. The other side is bringing in Colombians. Go figure, right? So the Ukrainians are bringing in Colombians, and they're putting them under the Ukrainian Foreign Legion, and now they're fighting. So what you have is Colombians fighting North Koreans over a border conflict between the Ukraine and Russia. This is happening. It's going to continue happening. My concern is that now that we've decided that we're going to use PMCs as kind of that foothold, right? And this has been happening for years. What's going to stop any other nation state from saying, well, I'm going to use my PMCs to go fight your PMCs for minerals, right? So when you look at the promulgation of PMCs right now, the big push is minerals. It's in Africa. It's wherever you have something that's worth value, there's going to be a private military contractor. And the Trump administration has made an absolute point that we need to secure these minerals. But they've also made it a point that we are not going to put boots on the ground to secure these minerals. So that's why Eric Prince, I think he's gotten more frequent flyer miles in the last 2 weeks than I've probably gotten in my entire life, because he's going state to state to state saying, I will help you not only secure your minerals, but I will help you collect the taxes that come from it when you sell these. And then from that, I'll take a little piece of it. Like I'm out of kindness of my heart, I'll take a little piece of that. But it does actually secure the minerals. And the U.S. is kind of banking on the fact that if we have a financial treaty with these individuals, and you have U.S. passport holders on the ground, that other countries are going to say, okay, I don't want any part of that. Sure. Because the full force of the U.S. could come in behind it. I don't think that's going to be the case. I think places like China and Russia are going to be more than happy to say, hey, we have our own private military contractors. China has, well, it was started by Eric Prince, but China has Frontier Services Group. You have Russia with the Wagner Group. Like, there's nothing stopping PMC on PMC conflict over something, and it's going to kick off. So when people say, "Oh, we're going to go into World War III," how's it going to start? It's going to start because a U.S. private military contractor gets killed, just like Fallujah 2004. It's going to make the news, and the U.S. is going to have to respond, and then reciprocally, the other side is going to respond.
Okay, masses to talk about from that.
Yeah.
Let's start, particularly with those in mind that might not be necessarily and totally understandably familiar with exactly your own, well, actually unique experiences in that you were US Air Force contractor, then US Army. Just explain the way you see it. You've talked about Eric Prince, and I think he'd be a really good example of the sort of revolving door environment and the connections between government, military, and contractors, and how it is a sort of mutual back-scratching exercise, and also how people, despite the disasters, they never disappear, they evolve. Just put that into a sort of meaningful summary.
All right, so private military contracting was created in 2004, essentially, right? So the United States didn't want to be seen as an occupier of Iraq. So we came in, we gave the government of Iraq to the people, and then we said, now it's a diplomatic mission. Ignore the whole war thing, not a big deal, that's still going on. But now it's a diplomatic mission from a U.S. policy standpoint. So you bring in all these diplomats, and somebody says, how are we going to protect these guys? They have diplomatic security services, but they don't have enough people to protect these diplomats. Blackwater gets a call, Blackwater gets a contract, dumb guy like me, 23 years old, I'm over there protecting diplomats. So it was born of necessity. That's what contractors are supposed to be for a stopgap measure, you get it done. And I remember being on the ground, we would all say, make your money now because State Department's going to start hiring their own people and training them up and taking our jobs, right? Get your money while it's available. What happened is that they decided that they didn't need to train their own people, because now you have this entire pool of individuals like me that are willing to go over there and risk their life. And if something bad happens to those people, nobody cares. I hate to say it, but nobody really cares, right? It's a contractor. You don't need the support that you have with the contractor that you have with U.S. military members. So what happened is we took this battle space and we flooded it with military and with private military contractors, and nary the two shall ever actually help each other out. Like I will tell you straight up, we did not like the military. The military absolutely hated us. And when you inject that many civilians into a battle space on your side, supposedly, it makes it extremely hard to actually execute a war policy. I can tell you that for every heart and mind that the U.S. military tried to save, Blackwater, myself included, was out there smashing up cars and pissing people off. So it's a contentious relationship, but at the same time, both are being paid by the same big fat pot of money, and neither one of them wants to say, I'm not doing a good enough job, right? How many times did you see in Iraq where they would say, we're making great progress, and then a car bomb goes off by me, and I'm like, that doesn't sound like progress. But the private military contractors were more than happy to support the U.S. military, do their own thing, and then say, but I don't have to play by your rules either. So it's almost like, if you think about it like a soccer game, football for you guys, I apologize. If you don't put rules around how to play football, you're going to have people over on one side, they're going to be injured. You're going to have people that are crying on the other side. Like, it's just going to be an absolute free-for-all. And that's what injecting private military contractors into a combat zone looks like. There are no rules. There are no regulations. There's nobody there with a whistle to say, hey, you guys are not supposed to be doing that. That's against the rules. So you end up having two organizations that are making a crap ton of money. And at the end of the day, is there really any reason to say, I want this to be more stable? And I don't think there is. I honestly, and I've had to do some soul searching. We did some great stuff, but were we a value add to the war effort? I don't think we were. I mean, if anything, we were a detractor, but we could sit there and say, yeah, on this part I did okay. And on this part we did good stuff. But strategically, it's just an absolute fiasco to do it, to wage war that way.
Yeah. And I mean, there's an irony in a sense on your description of military and contractors essentially hating each other, and I think anyone will understand exactly what it is you mean by that, because the conditions under which each operate are different, and at least different enough to cause that degree of friction. But Eric Prince, of course, is such a good example, because if it weren't for the military connection in the first place, then none of this would be happening. And indeed, most of the contractors themselves are military.
Yeah, or prior military for sure. And at the end of the day, Eric Prince makes his money because you already come out of the military trained. The military probably sank $500,000-$600,000 into me to train me, to pay me, to do my job. And then Eric Prince says, "Hey, I can sink, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 into you, and now you're fully trained to do the job that I need you. And I'll pay you way more than you're making as a civilian, or as a soldier, which was great for me. But at the same time, if I was making $500 a day, which I was, they were probably charging $2,000 a day for every day I was on ground. So the profit motive, I think, the first thing that it does is it makes every private military contractor want to expand, because for every boot on the ground, you make money. And what are you going to do? Of course, you're going to say, "Hey, we need more people to do this. We need more people to do that." And then that's how those contracts just get bloated. Now, Eric Prince, of course, yes, he was, honestly, he was the right place, the right time, the right uniform, as we say in the military. When they said there's a contract coming up, he said, "I know a bunch of guys. They use my shooting range. I can fill this contract." And he was able to actually do that. So he kind of stumbled into it, but now he is actively pushing the outer limits of what private military contractors can and cannot do.
Yeah, and on that, I mean, one example might seem to be the use of, well, at least the reported use of biometric checkpoints by GDC. I mean, just going back to Gaza, and this, certainly for the UK column audience, we report a lot on the push towards digital, more or less digital everything apparently, but in particular digital identity and the capturing of biometrics by sort of soft means. I mean, in the UK at the minute, there's a push to make people who are coming into the country and taking up particular tenancies, residential tenancies, to load up biometric information. The same with landlords. There's then, various initiatives for young people to get involved with this, to prove their age, specifically with regard to sort of online activities. And now here in Gaza, apparently we're seeing people required to give biometric information in order that they can pass a checkpoint, at the same time as Unit 8200 sort of tech offshoots have developed facial recognition technology for autonomous drone strikes and whatnot. I mean, that is a deeply sort of troubling situation. I mean, that's amazing power in a way for a private company to hold. Wouldn't you agree?
Well, you can call it whatever you want. I call it extrajudicial killing. Like that's really what it is. And I look, my guess is the IDF is doing a lot of the biometric stuff. I got some buddies in Gaza. I've never heard them say that they are out there collecting, iris scans and fingerprints. I don't think that's part of their purview. I'm sure the IDF is doing it. Here's what I will tell you, though, is that Eric Prince signed a 10-year contract with the government of Haiti, and he has private military contractors down there, and they are putting explosives on drones, and they are blowing up gang members. Now, I know nobody gives a crap about, well, everybody wants to quote international law, but when it actually comes down to it, most people just ignore it. Let's be honest here. Without any kind of due process, a drone is flying in and blowing somebody up in Haiti, and it is a private company that is making money off of that. Now, that's a big step. Let's be honest here. That is a massive step in what a private military contractor should be able to do. And I understand why Haiti would say, "Look, I need to use PMCs." How many billions of dollars has the US and other countries poured into Haiti? And it is still an absolute cesspool of corruption and gang violence. So, of course, the government of Haiti is going to say, "Look, that hasn't been working. What can I do? Let's take some of that money I'm getting from somebody else, and let's bring in a private military contractor that doesn't have the same rules and laws and restrictions as, say, the military does." So I think it's a very slippery slope that we are sliding down it at light speed right now, with Eric Prince being able to say, yes, we're going to go and we're going to secure Port-au-Prince and we're going to collect taxes. That's the other thing they're doing. And we're just going to blow up these gang members without having them go through any kind of a judicial or legal process. Like that's pretty dang scary.
Yeah, it is. It is very scary, not least because what you're describing is therefore normalizing that kind of activity, as though to suggest, well, I mean, now it's been done. So what's to stop us ignoring, like you say, more international humanitarian laws of armed conflict? It's been done now, so it's okay.
Well, I mean, Ukraine normalized it. Let's be honest, the Ukraine and Russia thing, they normalized it. It got put on X and YouTube and all those other things. So people are used to seeing it. And now it's like, well, hey, if people are seeing it, why not? Why the heck wouldn't I use this? And I mean, the funny thing is that he's not going and building these amazing, sophisticated drones like you have with like Lockheed Martin and these bombs. I mean, he's strapping explosives onto commercial grade drones that you could go buy at your local, hardware, Walmart, whatever, and then saying, yeah, that guy looks like he's bad news. Hit that dude. Like, it's very. I mean, this is when you watch those movies and you're like, oh, that could never happen. Like, we're getting to that point as a global society that's like, no, this is fine. We'll just fly something over this guy and blow him up.
Yeah. Which is terrifying and should cause outrage to the point of proper physical sort of pushback on this, and yet pretty much nothing.
Crickets.
Exactly. Now, tell me, therefore, are we looking at two parallel things, or is it part of the same thing? I mean, you've talked about Ukraine, you've talked about Gaza. That since we last spoke, a lot has changed in some respects, and yet also in others, nothing has changed. But I think from a UK column perspective, we've talked a lot about what looks like a march towards war, whether it be instigated by NATO, by some sort of US-led coalition, by the UK. It doesn't seem quite clear, but the way in which it's being described in the UK, we've just had a defence review published here talking about the defence dividend, massive investment in so-called defence. Again, we're on the doublespeak thing. Of course, it's actually war; it's not defence. But we all know what we're talking about. Now, that's one way of looking at it. But actually, a lot of what you're talking about is really suggesting that actually we're already there. And it's not really necessary for young people to swarm into military organizations, because look at what's happening. Look at what's happening in Haiti. Look what's happening with the Colombians in Ukraine or Libya or whatever. Do you see these as being sort of two parallel tracks, or are they different things, or what?
That depends. Do you ever want to win a war again? I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? So we had a very effective strategy in Afghanistan where we weren't really actively waging war, but we were targeting terrorists through drones, essentially, right? Like we could reach out and we could touch you and we could scare you and make it to where you don't have the ability to wage war against us using these. Nobody would say we won in Afghanistan, right? So at the end of the day, you can't win a war unless you take land, you hold land, and you say, now we're going to rebuild everything within this land, right? You're seeing that in Israel right now with Gaza. They're essentially saying the same thing. They're saying, look, we're never going to win against Hamas if we don't take all this land and we hold this land, and then we essentially prop up a government. Same thing we did after World War II. Germany, Japan, all, I don't know about Italy. I think they were like the redheaded stepchild of the axis of evil. But at the end of the day, if you want to win, you have to have boots on the ground. You have to have people with guns kicking in doors. What we're seeing now is the protracted way of waging war without actually making it into a war. And that's what the drones are doing. That's what the private military contractors are doing. Nobody's ever going to say that you're going to win a war using a PMC. But I think what the Trump administration is saying is, these minerals are so valuable to us as a nation that we need to have somebody on the ground as a deterrent so that Russia or China or some of these other world powers don't get a hold of it. Let's put private military contractors in there. Just see if that's enough of a deterrent. Because you don't want to put boots on the ground. Everybody's so tired of war. I don't know how it is in the UK. The US is so tired of war, so tired of putting boots on the ground. The pro-war party of the Republicans are like, no more wars. And somehow the liberal part, the Democrats are like, yeah, wars are okay as long as we don't use our own people. Like, it's fine if Ukrainians keep dying and the Russians keep dying. Nobody wants boots on the ground. How do you avoid that? How do you circumvent that? Use private military contractors.
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, especially on the minerals side of it, because of course there's been a lot about this with specific regard to Ukraine, which is such a good example because there is just so much proxy activity, which of course is exactly what you're describing. At the UK, yeah, in the UK, there seems to be utter apathy where the idea of war or any sort of involvement with the armed forces is concerned. I don't say that as a criticism necessarily, because like you've said previously, the whole idea of interference in other people's affairs in order to shove democracy down their throats is actually something that's never really been proven to work, and
it hasn't worked yet, but don't worry, we can keep trying.
Exactly. And the cost, the cost, what you actually said, I wrote it down because I thought it was so pertinent. You said on foreign policy, we continue to get ourselves in places where it's not going to change the outcome. And if it's not going to change the outcome, then why the heck are we doing it? And you went on to say, why are we sacrificing literal human beings? I mean, no one listening, I don't think, is really going to disagree with any of what you've said. But with that in mind, we find ourselves in a position, here we are, 2025, where European governments talking about a reassurance force to be sent into Ukraine, headquartered in London at the minute with a move to Paris and whatever. I mean, the whole idea sounds utterly fanciful, or at least it would if there weren't ulterior motives. But something like that, how do you see that idea, let's say as a specific example, playing out?
I mean, look, Europe is a weird place from an American perspective because we have a large, strong military, and I mean, second to none. And no offense, but at the end of the day, like the technology of war kind of starts in America, and then it pushes out. I've always been an avid believer that you have to have a very strong defense in case you need a very strong offense. There has to be a deterrent. And even when I was going to the snooty, school, Tufts University, Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy, they do talk about defensive versus offensive. And yes, you have to have that defensive structure. Europe has kind of ignored that for decades and decades and decades. And now that, not only that, but then, NATO kept expanding itself across, getting closer to Russia, just poking at the bear. And now all of a sudden they're saying, holy crap, Russia actually could go in and do stuff. And let's be honest, if the US and other countries weren't propping up the Ukraine, it would be decimated right now. Like, absolutely, there's no way that they would have been able to stop the Russian forces. So I think that at this point, as a kind of group, the European Union needs to look at itself and say, if we're going to keep poking at Russia, we probably need to have a strong defense. Now, the problem with that is that as soon as you create that strong defense, there's an inclination to say, ooh, I bet I could use that. And that's the concern, right? Russia keeps on going into NATO. What they were in Estonia, they flew into Estonia or something earlier this morning. Russia's going to keep poking back. And at some point, the European Union is going to have to say, am I going to use these defensively? Am I going to use these offensively? And when you have it, it's like having a hammer and you go outside, you see a nail sticking out. Well, I may as well use it, right? I'm not gonna go get a rock when I have a hammer. So I don't really know how I feel on it. I do feel that there has been decades of mismanagement, thinking that, oh, everything's going to be peaceful, it's going to be fine. And finally, Europe is saying, holy crap, like there are chances that this could go south very fast. How do we catch up? And I don't know if they can.
Okay. It's very interesting. Go on.
Let's look at the strategic. Russia, China, Turkey, North Korea, will throw them in there as the redheaded stepchild. They have everything they need. They have manufacturing. They can manufacture weapons. They can feed themselves. They don't need Europe the same way that I think Europe feels that they're needed by those countries. So I wouldn't be shocked if those four just said, screw the world, let's do our thing. And that's really kind of, how World War II started, right?
Yeah, I think having a transatlantic perspective on that is fascinating, because I think you're absolutely right. And actually the poke the bear piece of it is certainly the way in which, from an editorial point of view, that's absolutely the way in which UK Column has looked at this very issue. I mean, there's a point taken about Ukraine not surviving this long without the active intervention of all the various nations that have decided to sort of shell out. But frankly, without all those nations, would this conflict have started in the first place? Probably, in fact, almost certainly not. But let's cross the pond, because I think something we really need to hear about, which again, audience, I would think even in the States probably doesn't know very much about, is the engagement of PMCs on the border with Mexico. And just give an overview of that, and then we'll sort of pick into it a bit.
Yeah. So, and look, this all harkens back to 04, 05, right? Government agencies realized I can fill the gap with private military contractors. So here's what's happening. Under the Biden administration, we had an extremely porous border, but this didn't start under Biden. This started under President Obama, went under President Trump, Obama, and now Trump again. So essentially, when a unaccompanied minor, a child, presents themselves at the U.S.-Mexico border, Border Patrol only has 72 hours that they can detain them. Within that 72-hour time frame, they hand them off to a private military contractor. The biggest one is MVM, Mike Victor Mike. And they take them from the U.S. border into the United States, and they hand them off to a different contract under a different department. So they went from Department of Homeland Security, they drop them off. Now they're under the Department of Health and Human Services. That department has something called the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And those people are supposed to be the ones that say, this is a child, this is a refugee. We need to find a sponsor so that this child can go hang out with their family or whoever their sponsors are. You can't just release a child into the world, right? What's happened in real life is the cartels have realized this, and they actually call it Border Patrol Uber. So they can kidnap a child. They will drop them off at the U.S. border. A private military contractor, MVM, made billions, literally billions with a B over doing this, will take them into the United States, drop them off under the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and then that office will not screen the sponsors and hand them right back to the cartels. So I don't know how big a soccer pitch is, don't get me wrong, but think of the biggest one that you have. There are 73,000 children that are still missing. 73,000. That is enough to fill every seat in a soccer stadium are missing in the United States, because the cartels figured out our process was so broken that they could exploit it and take advantage of it.
That is a horrific tale. Is there any sort of mainstream, either media or political engagement with this?
No, nobody wants to touch it. Sadly, nobody wants to touch it. Now, what you do see is you see bits and pieces. A lot of people will talk about the nonprofits under the Office of Refugee Resettlement. And there has been publicly that, yes, initially we lost 350,000 of these kids. 350,000. I mean, that's insane. So now they found the vast majority of those, which is good. They actually went to their sponsors. But nobody wants to touch this. And it's not that they're not looking at the children or the nonprofits that handed these kids off. Nobody wants to talk about the private military contractors that were doing this job that is essentially trafficking children into the United States. Now, I would say about a month ago, there was a big bust, an immigration bust in California at a marijuana growing facility. They had 18 unaccompanied minors that were there. So where were these kids being sold? It's well documented. They're being sold into labor. They're being sold into sex trafficking. They're being, most of them, let's be honest, you're not going to find most of them. You don't know what happened. But from a cartel perspective, If I can get somebody into the United States using Border Patrol Uber, I can use that individual for years or decades. The return on investment is much higher smuggling individuals over a long term than bringing in narcotics, which have a huge, um, which if you get caught with, you're going to go to jail. But nobody's getting caught because you're using the system to traffic these minors. And it really is just kind of a sad state of affairs that we've outsourced the morality of moving children and giving children to their family. Now, if I'm a cartel, I'll tell you exactly what happens. I take those kids in the United States, I reach back out to their family and say, hey, if you pay me $25,000, I'll give you your kid back. Great. They pay him $25,000. Now they say, give me another $25,000. So they can extort the families back home. And if the families don't pay extra, then I can sell that kid into labor or sex trafficking or anything. You'll never see that child again.
Okay.
Dude, it is absolutely gross. Now, look, private military contractors have always been in that gray area. Like, this is scummy. And I don't know why anybody would take this job. I've asked, and people say, well, I got to make my mortgage. Like, it is scummy, and I'll call them out to their face.
Yeah, well, that was what I was going to ask about. I mean, how is it that because people who are taking part in this can't not know numbers? I mean, of sort of PMCs, the operation that's actually making this happen. Do you have any idea how many are involved in it? Ballpark?
No, and that's the problem with using a company, right? A company, I can't use a Freedom of Information Act to say, hey,
Sure.
Company, what is the only thing I can find is what the contracts actually paid out. So I've been able to find what the contracts pay out. I've been able to find the job postings. I mean, look, if you're on the internet right now, go to MVM Careers, Mike Victor Mike Careers, and I guarantee that there is a job posting right now that says Youth Travel Coordinator, which means I'm trafficking kids into the United States from the US-Mexico border. So look, companies make money. Like, that's all there is to it. This is like the scummiest thing ever. And I don't blame the company as much as I blame the government for not actually having the resources to do this themselves. And I also blame the people that are on the ground that were moving these kids, because there's no way that you were sitting there with 30 kids, getting on a charter flight, flying them to a random podunk airport in the middle of the United States, dropping them off with their paperwork and saying, all right, I did my job. These kids are going to go to a great home. Like, something is wrong when your spidey senses should be tingling that something is wrong. And for them to sit there and say, I didn't know, I think it's just a way to help them sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, you've used the phrase again, outsourcing morality, and that's why I entitled the previous interview "Outsourcing Morality," because I thought it really just it struck to the heart of what it is you are talking about. Now, what I want to ask, because one of the big talking points then, quite rightly, was your book, which you have neatly positioned behind you. So for anyone not watching but listening, Morgan has written an excellent book called Guns, Girls and Greed. Now, we talked about it then because it was fairly fresh out, and we sort of went through parts of it. Now 18 months has elapsed. What has the reaction been? What possible fallout has happened? I mean, what's happened? You said some stuff in that was not, I imagine, not going to go down well in certain quarters. What has happened?
Yeah, and I wrote the book very candidly, and at the end of the day, the reader can sit there and they say, was this a value add or was this a detraction to the war? Like at the end of the day, the reader can decide. Now, what happens is that, a lot of the former contractors will read it, and most of them are great guys. Most of them were like, yeah, that's how it was. Like, that was the early days. We were literally building the plane as we flew it. Right. Like we were just making stuff up as we went. Now, it got more professional as it went along. But at the end of the day, I can't write about that because I wasn't there. A lot of the people are pissed that I use the term mercenary because they want to make it pretend like it was their patriotic duty. They were over there as patriots and the money was just a side thing. Now, look, I don't care how you look yourself in the mirror. At the end of the day, I was there for money. I can only speak from my experience. When I came out with the article about Gaza saying that those guys are mercenaries, man, they were livid. Everybody, my buddies were like, "Holy crap, Morgan, what is this?" And I was like, "You guys are mercenaries," and they'd get pissed off initially because there's negative connotations to that. But at the end of the day, I think if you meet the legal definition, go make your money, but don't sit there and lie to yourself. Like that's what I don't understand. So yeah, there's been quite a bit of fallout. People say all the stuff in my book, it's all lies and I made it up and all this other stuff. But I've offered, hey, come on a podcast and tell me what I lied about. I'm happy to sit here and debate it. Nobody will do it. So, you know, I don't know if the UK has this, but the veteran community kind of eats its own. You see this with all the stuff that's going on with Tim Kennedy. The private military contractor takes that to a next level. Like if you say anything against Blackwater or private military contractors, like they chew you up and spit you out. So I just happen to be the voice that makes them all mad, and they get on Facebook and get angry, and and it's like a bunch of grumpy old men having coffee. They're like, "Oh, back in my day, this Morgan guy is probably a wimp." Like, who cares, man?
But okay, so on the other side, has anyone surprising kind of come out of the woodwork to congratulate you on doing something that frankly no one else had done?
Yeah, most of the guys that read the book are like, "Look, it's good, it's legitimate. You were 23 years old. Like you wrote it from your perspective, and it makes a whole lot of sense." And I would say that's 90% of the Blackwater guys. But it's that vocal 10% that are butthurt. Now, Blackwater, of course, is Eric Prince has not congratulated me on my book. I'm waiting. For his nice email or whatever. But you know, it is what it is. It's a war novel at the very ground level. The way that a PFC sees war is different than the way that a general sees war. The way that I saw Blackwater is completely different than the way Eric Prince saw Blackwater from his, big nice office in Moyock, North Carolina. It's just life. So if people want to get butthurt about it, it's not going to change anything that I do.
No, fair enough. And you've been writing a bit since. I mean, a few sort of articles here and there. Are you considering the idea of another book?
Yeah, the return on investment of books is not that high. I'll be honest with you. You put in a lot of time and energy and love and blood and sweat and tears if you get a paper cut. So I don't know. I would love to finish the book that I started looking at veteran suicide and why people kind of take that final out. Because what I've seen is that a lot of people say, well, they were in the military, whether they went to Iraq or not. Oh my God, like that's the reason why they shot themselves. It's not that cut and dry, and it's a lot more complex. So my thesis of the book is you take a bunch of people at the same time doing the same job and the same attack, and why do some people make it out and some people decide that they're going to end their life later. So I'm about 2/3 of the way done. I should probably just start plinking away at it, but let's be honest here. If I was writing books to retire, I think by 2187 I'll be retired.
We'll have you back on then. But tell me though, I mean, it's obviously, unless it's too much of a spoiler, I mean, do you have a sort of working hypothesis on that, or on the answer to your question?
Yeah, I think it's how much you internalize it. I know I talked to people. I talked to one guy and he was like, "Oh my God, my Humvee, we parked over the top of a grenade." And like this was like, they were very stressed out about it. And I was like, "Did it blow up?" And they said, "No, it didn't blow up." And I was like, "Well, I walked next to a bullet the other day and it didn't hit me either." I think a lot of people will take their time in the military and they'll personalize it. They'll say they were shooting at me. They were attacking me. Those rockets were aimed at me. I'm the opposite. I'm like, look, the rockets came in, they got pretty close. And you can read about it in the book. Nothing is personal, right? It's not personal when I smash your car, and it's not personal when you lob a rocket at me. It's just luck of the draw. So I think a lot of people, when you start getting into that cycle of they were trying to attack me, it's scary. It's absolutely scary. And I think a lot of people have a hard time living with that. And then you start throwing in the culture of the military where, you don't talk about it, you shut up, and you drink your sorrows away. It's a recipe for disaster. I've known a lot of people that committed suicide, especially in Blackwater, and I would say that substance abuse is a leading factor in why, not necessarily why, but when they decided to finally do it, that definitely played a role.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's a very somber subject, but I mean, I really do hope you do carry on writing, because I think that's something that people need to read. Because I think unless you are part of that sort of element of society, it's very difficult to understand it. And I can absolutely echo what you're talking about on this side of the Atlantic. It is a consistent problem, actually, not just in the veteran community, but also in the serving, in the serving environment. A very, disproportionately high number of suicides for all kinds of reasons. Now, let's get on to something with regard to that. What's your view? Because you spoke about it last time. You made a distinction between effectively the rank of captain and below, and everybody above as being sort of generally useless. Exactly what you're talking about with the sort of this personification of anxiety. It's all about self. Is there a leadership function that could or should deal with this in the chain of command on the military side? I'm not talking about the PMC side, because I know that's a separate issue. We've talked about that. There's basically no support. But within the military context, is there, can a finger be pointed at such and such an ability, a failing of commanders in general to deal with exactly these sorts of problems with their troops?
I mean, just from my perspective, a lot of military leadership, when you go overseas, I feel like they put undue stress on their junior enlisted. And look, I don't think it's on purpose, but you I don't know if you were junior enlisted, but I can tell you that, like, you will sit there and you will wait and you will be bored, and then it'll be like the dumbest little thing and people will just have a fit about it, right? So let's just take water as an example. Everybody's got water, and then everybody's got to go and check their buddy to make sure that they have water, and one guy doesn't have enough water in his canteen, and then everybody's getting punished because one guy didn't fill up his canteen, even though he had another canteen. So I think the military puts a lot of undue stress on junior enlisted, worrying about and punishing little stupid things. Look, I'll give you an example. I had a soldier that had a negligent discharge, um, and I was like, look, I was a lieutenant, so I shouldn't be the one that's training you on weapons, right? That should be your sergeants. He had never been trained on the 249. He had a negligent discharge. So my command went up there, and my battalion commander was like, we're gonna do an Article 15. And I said, if you're gonna do an Article 15, it starts with me. And then it's got to go through all my NCOs because they didn't train him on his weapon. You're not going to go after this PFC because he's an easy target. And I think that's how that's why you have the E4 mafia. That's why you have a lot of these junior enlisted that are frustrated with the military, is because somebody on their high horse will sit there and say that shouldn't have happened, but not actually look at why did that happen. So I had to train my NCOs on how to use a 249, who had to go and train him on how to do a 249. And at the end of the day, there was like a letter of reprimand or something stupid that went down. But I don't know that there's a lot of military officers that would put their neck out like that. Like, I knew I was getting out. I didn't care. But a lot of military officers just kind of say, this is how it's always been. This is how we're going to do it. And we're going to stress the hell out of everybody. And when you do that every day for 365 days, and these soldiers come back with this elevated stress level, are you shocked that they're trying to find a way out, whether that's through alcohol or through suicide? Like, you can't be that shocked by it.
No. And I think you're absolutely right. The majority of people, certainly in a serving capacity, would not have done exactly what it is that you describe. Now, I wonder if we can just now move sort of in a way to begin to wrap up. And I'm going to put you on the spot to a certain extent, but clearly, you keep up with what's going on. You have a deep and personal knowledge of PMCs and the way they operate. Are you looking at any particular situation now, interwoven and interlinked as they all are, but are you looking at anything now that PMCs are involved in and imagining that it will tip over into a larger scale conflict? And if so, where?
I mean, Ukraine is the easy answer. Let's be honest. The Ukraine with the minerals and being able to get Vectis under Eric Prince and having U.S. military members on the ground, or not military members, PMCs on the ground. That's the easy answer. I think the harder answer is Africa, especially like DRC. That's where Eric Prince is doing also the minerals deal, and being able to collect taxes. And I think I don't think it's an enemy as much as it is the local. How's the local population going to see these individuals? Haiti's the same way. I mean, how are the gang members? Do you expect the gang members to say, "Hey, don't worry, we got these private military contractors that are securing Port-au-Prince. That's fine. We'll give up all of our territory." So I think that's where it's going to kick off, and it's going to be the locals that get frustrated and say, we've been running the show for how long, and now you're going to come in and try to change it. It's never going to work. And I think you'll see some. I think you're gonna have to see some casualties before anybody even takes a look at it. And that's the sad part, is it'll probably take 5, 6, 7 of those casualties before anybody even does a news report on it.
Yeah, that's probably exactly the way it would be. And on that, on sort of numbers, you spoke earlier about the enormous discrepancy in rates of pay between being serving military and being a PMC. If something does kick off and either NATO, let's say, or indeed a non-NATO but largely sort of NATO orientated coalition, doesn't really matter. If those armed forces are to get engaged in some respect, let's say in Ukraine, do you see there being an exodus from armed forces into PMCs simply because of the money? Is that a sort of a phenomenon, or does it not quite work like that?
It doesn't work like that. I can tell you that when I was in Iraq, people would always say, "Oh, I want to come work for Blackwater," and I'd give my email address. I'd never hear from them again, because the military gives you stability. It gives you a paycheck on the 1st and the 15th. It gives you your medical, your family, your housing, all those other things. As a private military contractor, you really have to be like, I don't want to be in the military and I want to make a crap ton of money. But the problem with it is that the second that you leave that country, your paycheck is done. So I haven't seen that happen the way that there was a concern for it. I do think what you might see is the private military contractors. Some of the guys that I worked at Blackwater are actually like working as PMCs still 20 years later. It's insane. But I think that you'll see some PMCs where they'll go in and they'll say, look, I'm going to do this for 2, 3, 4 months and be done with it. And then some people say this is a viable career field. And that's insane to me. The fact that at this point you can get out of the military and you can say, I could be a PMC for the rest of my life, and then I'll retire as a private military contractor. But I will say, I mean, it's hard on the family life. So if you want to have wife and kids and all that other stuff, like it's not an easy job. So I don't think that the military is having people yanked out of it necessarily to be PMCs. But I would say that there's a draw. That money sounds really good. It is tasty.
Yeah, it is, evidently, and your experiences bear that out. And I think it's especially interesting, of course, that you have had those military experiences sandwiching your own in Iraq. Just to sort of finish up, I guess, what I suppose, actually, I think I asked you this last time, but specifically with PMCs, I mean, what would you say to anyone now who is, say, of military joining age, and they were considering one route or the other, military or PMC, if it was just to be a short period of time and they wanted to, to do something kind of active and interesting, what would you say?
Well, I mean, you're not going to get into a PMC unless you put in your military time, or a police officer. So of course, now let's pretend like you could go one or the other. What I say is set a goal. If you want to have wife and kids and stability, go into the military. If you want quick money and the PMC side, set a goal. Whether it's paying off your house, $200,000 in the bank, paying off student loans, whatever it is, set a goal. And the reason is you want to be at a point after you've done it for, let's say, a year to say, do I want to go back or do I have to go back? and I'm a have to go back guy, right? I came home, I blew all my money, and I had to go back for more to be able to, pay my mortgage. So if you set that goal and you reach it, then it changes your paradigm to say, I don't have to go back. I want to, and I will, but I don't have to. And a lot of people, what they did it the same way I did, where they have to go back. And I mean, I've had people reach out to me that have been contracting for 10, 15 years and saying, I don't have anything at home. I literally don't have anything. I have to have this job. I need it. You never want to be in that position.
Yeah. A cautionary tale, and I think we'll draw to a close there. Odo, are you about to add something else?
No, it is a cautionary tale. I mean, my entire book is a cautionary tale.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's it. So what we'll do is we'll wrap up by saying, if you haven't read Morgan's book, Guns, Girls and Greed, then do. Morgan, where can we get your book?
Amazon. The easiest place to get it is on Amazon. It's also on audio. So a comedian named Jay Moore did the audio, and look, if you can have a funny war book, this is a funny war book. And he hit all the punchlines. So if you're not into reading and you want to listen to it, the audio, everything's out there, Amazon, Spotify, you name it.
Perfect. It is, and I must say, it is a funny war book, but it's got some really serious, really, really well-considered points in it. So huge recommendation there. Also, anywhere else that you're writing? And I know you're on social media too.
I've been writing for Skill Set Magazine, and it's a lot like the book. I just, take a subject and I make jokes about it, but I try to give you some actual information on ways to, avoid terrorist attacks and protect your house and stuff like that. So.
Okay, and then Twitter, is it? Sorry, X these days?
X, yes, I am at Blackwater Dude and the number 1, because I'm the Blackwater Dude, right? So X, Instagram, and TikTok at Blackwater Dude 1.
Super. Okay, well, yet again, Morgan, it's been a pleasure to have you on, and a total sort of roller coaster, but a very insightful one at that. So thank you very much indeed, and please do come back.
All right, thanks a bunch, Charles.